Welcome to the Galactic Species Relations Academy, where young beings from across the cosmos come to learn about each other and pretend they're not all secretly planning interstellar wars. It's a beautiful dream, really. Almost as beautiful as the Chrome and Crystal Lecture Hall, where Professor Krebs is attempting to teach his favorite course, Interspecies Threat Assessment, to a room full of species who think they're God's gift to the galaxy. Professor Krebs himself is a mollusk prime, which means he looks like someone crossed an octopus with a filing cabinet and gave it tenure. His tentacles wiggle enthusiastically as he addresses the class, suction cups making little popping sounds against his podium. "Students," he announces in his wet burbling voice, "this semester we will be conducting a comprehensive analysis of the most dangerous species in known space. You will research, present, and ultimately vote on which civilization poses the greatest threat to galactic peace." In the back corner, Jake Morrison adjusts his worn baseball hat and tries not to smile. Jake's the kind of guy who looks like he fixes motorcycles for a living, which is funny, because he's probably the only person in the room who could disassemble a motorcycle with his bare hands in under 10 minutes. He's also the only human in a class of 23 beings, but who's counting? Up front, Zeph the Zentorian warrior practically vibrates with excitement. Zentorians look like someone took a rhinoceros, taught it to walk upright, and gave it an ego problem. Zeph's been bragging since day one about his species' glorious conquest heritage and their unmatched combat prowess. Right now, he's flexing muscles that could probably crush a small vehicle, which would be more impressive if he wasn't also taking notes with a sparkly gel pen. Next to him sits Glim, a crystalline entity who resembles a walking chandelier having an anxiety attack. Crystallines are a hive mind species, which means Glim is technically having this conversation with about 40 billion of his closest friends. This makes him nervous in the way that being permanently connected to the galactic internet would make anyone nervous. He's currently shifting through 17 different crystal formations per minute, creating a light show that's giving half the class a headache. Then there's Vox, the Nexari telepath who looks like a purple squid wearing a three-piece suit. Nexari consider themselves the intellectual superiors of the galaxy, mostly because they can read minds, and love to remind everyone about it. Vox has spent the entire semester accidentally broadcasting everyone's embarrassing thoughts to the class, which would be more annoying if most of his classmates had thoughts worth broadcasting. And finally, there's Boom. Yes, that's actually his name. Boom is a Pyrothian, and Pyrothians are basically what happens when you give a rock creature a chemistry set and a demolitions license. Boom got his name the traditional Pyrothian way, by blowing up his first moon at age 12. He's been trying to impress everyone since day one by creating small explosions during lunch break, which explains why the cafeteria no longer serves anything flammable. The project will culminate in a democratic vote, Professor Krebs continues, his tentacles now arranging papers with the efficiency of a very slimy office manager. Each of you will present your case for why your chosen species represents the greatest threat to galactic stability. Jake shifts in his seat, the metal creaking under his weight. He's been listening to his classmates debate this topic for weeks now, and it's been like watching a bunch of kindergartners argue about who would win in a fight between Superman and Batman. Lots of passion, very little actual understanding of the subject matter. Zeph raises a massive fist. "Professor, surely this is merely a formality. The Zentorian Empire has conquered 47 star systems in the past 2 centuries. Our warrior culture is legendary throughout the galaxy." "Ah, yes," Vox interrupts, his mental voice dripping with condescension as it echoes in everyone's heads. "But brute force is so primitive. The Nexari Collective has toppled governments without firing a single shot. Mind control is far more elegant than your crude physical violence." Glim flickers nervously through several color spectrums. "Well, actually, if you consider the mathematical efficiency of the Crystalline Confederation's resource allocation algorithms, we could theoretically outproduce any military-industrial complex in the galaxy, so really, we're the most dangerous from an economic warfare standpoint. Not that we would ever use such capabilities aggressively, of course." Boom just grins and detonates a small firecracker on his desk. Boom makes things go boom. Boom is danger. Jake watches this display with the kind of expression usually reserved for watching paint dry, except paint drying is generally more intellectually stimulating. He's been the quiet one all semester, the exchange student who sits in the back, takes notes, and occasionally asks questions that make everyone uncomfortable because they're actually good questions. Professor Krebs' eye stalks swiveled toward Jake. "Mr. Morrison, you've been rather quiet on this topic. What species do you think poses the greatest threat?" 22 alien faces turned toward Jake with expressions ranging from polite curiosity to barely concealed amusement. The human exchange student, weighing in on galactic threats. How adorable. Jake adjusts his cap again and shrugs. Oh, I don't know, Professor. I figure I'll just see what everyone else comes up with first. Might learn something. The class chuckles. Isn't that sweet? The little human wants to learn from his betters. Zeph grins with what he probably thinks is friendly condescension. Do not worry, human Jake. Perhaps your species will make the list someday. Once you discover faster-than-light travel without borrowed technology. Yeah, Jake says mildly, maybe someday. If any of them had been paying attention, they might have noticed that Jake's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. But they weren't paying attention. They never did. 3 weeks later, Professor Crabnox is standing at his podium, with what passes for excitement among his species, which mainly involves his tentacles writhing in slightly more organized patterns than usual. Today's the day for preliminary voting, and the classroom buzzes with the kind of energy you'd expect from a bunch of teenagers arguing about who's tougher. Students, please submit your initial nominations for the most dangerous species in known space, Krebnox announces, his suction cups making wet popping sounds as he gestures toward the holographic ballot display. Remember, this is based on your research and analysis of threat potential, not personal preference. Right, personal preference. 'Cause nothing says objective analysis like Zeph immediately nominating his own species while flexing. The nominations start rolling in, and surprise, surprise, they're exactly what you'd expect from a bunch of kids who think the universe revolves around their home planets. The Zentorian Empire, Zeph announces proudly, has maintained military supremacy for over 3 centuries. Our warrior culture produces the finest fighters in the galaxy. We have conquered 47 systems through superior tactics and unmatched physical prowess. Vox's mental voice slithers through everyone's consciousness like an uninvited thought. How quaint. The Nexari Collective prefers the elegance of mental domination. Why destroy a civilization when you can simply make them want to serve you? We've toppled 17 governments in the past decade without firing a shot. Glim shifts through nervous purple and orange hues. The Crystalline Confederation has calculated 2,847 different scenarios for galactic domination through economic manipulation and resource control. Not that we would ever implement such strategies, but theoretically speaking, we could bankrupt entire sectors through coordinated market manipulation. Boom lights up like a kid on Christmas morning. Death spiders of Kepler 9, they eat faces, and they're spiders, big ones, with poison, and they eat faces. The nominations continue. The void wraiths of Sector 12, who apparently feed on starlight and leave solar systems in eternal darkness. The hive queens of Proxima Beta, who can birth 1 million warrior drones in a single day. The mechanical hegemony, who turn conquered planets into factory worlds. Standard stuff, really. The usual galactic bogeymen that every species loves to whisper about around the cosmic campfire. Then Jake raises his hand. Yes, Mr. Morrison. Professor Krebnox's eye stalk swiveled toward him, with what might be curiosity if mollusk primes were capable of such complex emotions. I'd like to nominate humans, Jake says, in the same tone someone might use to order coffee. The classroom goes dead silent for exactly 2.3 seconds, which, in cosmic terms, is practically an eternity. Then the laughter starts. It's not mean-spirited laughter exactly. It's more like the kind of gentle chuckling you'd hear if a particularly cute puppy tried to challenge a lion to a wrestling match. Patronizing doesn't even begin to cover it. Zeph's laugh sounds like boulders tumbling down a mountain. Humans? Jake, my friend, your species has barely achieved interstellar flight. You still use chemical rockets for most of your transportation. And your longest recorded war lasted only 6 of your years, Vox adds, his mental voice dripping with amusement. The Nexari have conflicts that span millennia. Glim flickers through what might be embarrassed colors on Jake's behalf. No offense, Jake, but humans have only colonized 4 star systems. The Crystalline Confederation spans 847 systems across 12 galactic sectors. Boom just shakes his rocky head. Humans make tiny booms. Not scary booms. Boom likes humans. Humans are squishy friends. Professor Krebnox makes a wet sound that might be clearing his throat if he had a throat to clear. Mr. Morrison, while I appreciate your species pride, perhaps you might consider a more objectively threatening nomination. The project does require serious academic analysis. Jake just shrugs and gives them that same mild smile he's been wearing all semester. Nah, I'm good with humans. Should be interesting to research. The holographic display updates with the preliminary results. Zentorians lead with 6 votes. Nexari follow with 4. The Death Spiders get 3 votes, probably all from Boom. Various other nightmare species get scattered support. Humans get exactly 1 vote. Jake's own. Well, Professor Krebnock says, his tentacles arranging the data with bureaucratic efficiency, the nominations are complete. You have 2 weeks to prepare your presentations defending your choices. May I suggest, Mr. Morrison, that you consider the scope of this assignment. We are discussing galactic-level threats, not regional curiosities. Oh, I understand the scope, Professor, Jake says, leaning back in his chair. Trust me, I've got plenty of material to work with. Zeph leans over with what he probably thinks is helpful concern. Jake, perhaps you would like to join our group? We could discuss real warrior cultures, not just your planet's minor territorial disputes. Thanks for the offer, Jake replies, but I think I'll stick with what I know. As the class packs up to leave, Jake can hear the whispered conversations around him. Poor human Jake, so naive. Doesn't he realize how outclassed his species is? It's almost sad, really, watching him try to play with the big kids. Box's mental voice drifts through the room one more time. Humans. Charmingly optimistic meat sacks who think they're dangerous because they discovered fire. Jake just keeps smiling as he closes his notebook. If any of them had bothered to look closely, they might have noticed that his notebook wasn't full of class notes like everyone else's. Instead, it contained what looked like tactical assessments, force composition analyses, and casualty projections. But they didn't look closely. They never did. After all, what could a human possibly know about warfare that the rest of the galaxy hadn't figured out already? 2 weeks later, the classroom has been transformed into what Professor Krebnock likes to call a professional presentation environment, which is academic speak for we moved the desks around and added a holographic projector. The students have prepared their final arguments for why their chosen species deserves the coveted title of most dangerous in the galaxy, and the energy in the room is thick enough to cut with a plasma sword. Professor Krebnock's tentacles writhe with what passes for professorial excitement. Today, we will hear your final presentations. Each student will have 15 minutes to make their case, followed by questions from the class. We will then hold our final vote. His eye stalks swivel around the room. Who would like to present first? Zeph's massive fist shoots up so fast it creates a small sonic boom. I will present the case for Zentorian military supremacy. Of course he will. Zeph's been practically vibrating with anticipation all morning, and that's not a figure of speech. Zentorians literally vibrate when excited, which makes sitting near them feel like being next to a construction site. Zeph stomps to the front of the room, his hooves clanking against the metal floor with all the subtlety of a tank parade. The holographic display springs to life behind him, showing images of Zentorian warriors in gleaming battle armor, massive war machines, and impressive-looking explosion footage. Behold, Zeph announces, his voice booming like a motivational speaker with a megaphone. The Zentorian Empire. For over 3 centuries, we have been the undisputed military power of the outer spiral. His presentation is exactly what you'd expect from someone whose idea of subtlety is using a smaller hammer. Statistics flash across the screen. 47 conquered systems, 12.7 million active military personnel, weapons capable of cracking moons. It's impressive in the way that a very large explosion is impressive, which is to say it's loud and attention-grabbing but not necessarily sophisticated. Our warrior culture begins in childhood, Zeph continues, showing images of tiny Zentorian younglings practicing combat with weapons that could probably level city blocks. Every citizen serves a minimum of 20 standard years in the military. We have never lost a direct military engagement in over 200 years. The class makes appropriately impressed noises. Even Jake nods appreciatively, though anyone paying close attention might notice he's nodding the way someone does when they see a particularly well-executed magic trick. They already know the secret too. Zeph concludes with a holographic display of the Zentorian battle flag, which features a stylized fist crushing a planet. Subtle as a brick through a window, but effective in its own way. Next up is Vox, who glides to the front of the room with the kind of smug confidence that can only come from being able to read everyone's minds and knowing they're all secretly impressed despite themselves. My dear classmates, Vox begins, his mental voice oozing across their consciousness like honey mixed with condescension. While our Zentorian friend here has certainly mastered the art of breaking things, true power lies not in destruction, but in control. The display behind him shifts to show elegant images of Nexari architecture, their crystalline cities, and what appear to be very calm, very orderly populations going about their daily lives with the kind of peaceful compliance that would make a dictator weep with joy. The Nexari Collective has perfected the art of mental influence. Why conquer a world when you can simply convince its leaders that serving us is their own idea? We have toppled 17 governments in the past decade through pure psychological manipulation. No armies, no destruction, no messy cleanup afterward. Box demonstrates by briefly touching the minds of his classmates, causing them to suddenly develop an inexplicable craving for Nexari-style meditation crystals. It's a neat trick, and definitely unsettling in the way that realizing someone has been rearranging your thoughts tends to be. True danger, Vox concludes with mental smugness that practically radiates from his purple form, is invisible until it's too late. Glim practically flickers his way to the front of the room, cycling through nervous color combinations like a Christmas tree having an anxiety attack. His presentation is a masterwork of academic overpreparation, complete with charts, graphs, statistical models, and approximately 17 different economic theories that would make a university professor weep with joy. The Crystalline Confederation represents the most significant long-term threat through economic and logistical supremacy, he begins, his voice harmonizing with itself as different crystal formations resonate at different frequencies. Our hive mind structure allows for unprecedented coordination of resources across 847 star systems. His data is genuinely impressive. Production capacities that dwarf entire galactic sectors. Trade networks that could strangle enemy economies without firing a shot. Computational power that makes artificial intelligences look like pocket calculators. If the galaxy ever needs to be conquered through spreadsheets and quarterly reports, the crystallines are definitely the species to call. We have calculated 2,847 different scenarios for achieving galactic economic domination, Glim continues, showing projections that make everyone's heads hurt just looking at them. The most efficient requires only 47.3 standard years, and would result in a 94.7% reduction in resource waste across all participating systems. It's the kind of presentation that makes you realize that sometimes the real monsters are the ones who genuinely believe they can make everything better through proper organization. Finally, Boom waddles up to the front with the enthusiasm of someone who's about to show off their favorite hobby. His presentation is refreshingly straightforward. Things that go boom, bigger things that go boom, and ways to make even bigger things go boom. Death spiders of Kepler 9, he announces cheerfully, displaying images that immediately make half the class wish they'd skipped lunch. Giant arachnids with too many legs, too many eyes, and way too many teeth. They are spiders. They are big. They eat faces. Boom's presentation style is less academic research and more enthusiastic nature documentary, narrated by someone who really enjoys explosions. But his data is solid. The death spiders have consumed 17 civilizations in the past century, reproduce at terrifying rates, and apparently consider sentient beings a delicacy. Also, Boom adds with the kind of glee that would be concerning in any other species, they explode when they die. Boom-like species that explode. Several other students present their cases with varying degrees of competence and sanity. The Void Wraiths get a presentation that's basically, they eat stars and leave everything dark, which is scary. The Hive Queens get a detailed analysis of their reproductive capabilities that makes everyone uncomfortable. The Mechanical Hegemony gets a technical breakdown of their planet-eating factory ships that's equal parts impressive and horrifying. Through it all, Jake sits quietly in the back, taking notes and occasionally asking questions that are just a little too specific to be casual curiosity. When Zeph talks about Zenturian combat doctrine, Jake asks about their logistics chains. When Vox demonstrates mental manipulation, Jake asks about range limitations and psychic shielding. When Glim presents his economic models, Jake asks about infrastructure vulnerability. The questions are good questions. Uncomfortably good questions. The kind of questions that suggest Jake's been thinking about these things from a very different angle than academic curiosity would normally require. But nobody pays attention to that. They're all too busy being impressed with their own presentations and planning their victory speeches for when they, inevitably, win the vote. Finally, Professor Krebnox's eye stalks sweep the room and settle on Jake. Mr. Morrison, you're our final presenter. Please, enlighten us about the threat posed by humans. The entire class turned to look at Jake with expressions ranging from polite interest to barely suppressed amusement. Poor human Jake, about to embarrass himself in front of the whole class. It's almost sweet, really, watching him try to play in the big leagues. Jake stands up slowly, adjusting his baseball cap with the kind of casual movement that somehow suggests coiled springs and carefully controlled tension. He walks to the front of the room with an easy, unhurried stride that makes absolutely no sound on the metal floor. "Well," he says, looking out at the sea of alien faces with that same mild smile he's been wearing all semester, "this should be fun." For the first time all day, the classroom goes completely quiet. Not the polite quiet of an attentive audience, but the sudden, sharp quiet that happens when every survival instinct in the room simultaneously whispers that something has just changed. Jake stands at the front of the classroom, hands in his pockets, looking for all the world like he's about to discuss the weather rather than defend his thesis on galactic-level threats. The holographic display behind him shows a simple image: Earth, blue and green and utterly unremarkable, floating serenely in space like the kind of postcard you'd send to your grandmother. "So, humans," Jake begins conversationally, as if he's starting a casual chat over coffee, rather than delivering an academic presentation. "I know what you're all thinking. We're new to the galactic scene. We've only had faster-than-light travel for about 50 years, and even that's mostly borrowed technology from more advanced species." Several students nod along. Finally, the human is showing some proper perspective on his species' limitations. This should be refreshingly humble after all the chest-beating from the other presentations. "We've only colonized 4 star systems," Jake continues, his tone remaining pleasant and matter-of-fact. "Our population is relatively small by galactic standards. Our technology is primitive compared to most of yours. We still use chemical rockets for basic transportation, we've never conquered anyone, and our longest recorded war lasted only 6 years. Zeph makes a sound that might be sympathetic encouragement. Poor Jake, he's clearly struggling to find anything impressive about his species. Maybe someone should put him out of his misery before this gets too embarrassing. "But here's the thing," Jake says, and his smile shifts just slightly. "It's still friendly, still casual, but there's something else there now. Something that makes Professor Krebnox's tentacles stop their constant writhing and go very, very still. Those numbers I just gave you? They're not exactly the whole story." Jake touches the holographic controls, and the peaceful image of Earth zooms in to show its surface. Continents and oceans, mountain ranges and deserts, all looking perfectly normal and non-threatening. Exactly the kind of pleasant garden world that advanced species like to vacation on. "See, the thing about humans is that we spent most of our history trying to kill each other," Jake says cheerfully, as if he's discussing a particularly interesting hobby. "That 6-year war I mentioned? That was just our most recent global conflict. We call it World War II, which should give you a hint about how we number these things." The classroom has gone from politely attentive to uncomfortably focused. Something about Jake's delivery, the way he's standing, the casual mention of multiple world wars, is setting off alarm bells in minds that have been trained to recognize potential threats. "World War II lasted 6 years and involved pretty much every nation on our planet," Jake continues, pulling up casualty statistics that make several students shift nervously in their seats. "We estimate about 70 to 85 million people died. That's just the second one, by the way. The First World War was only 20 years earlier and killed about 20 million. Glim flickers through several shades of what might be concerned yellow. "Jake, those numbers seem rather high for internal conflicts." "Oh, those are just the big ones," Jake says with a wave of his hand. "We've had thousands of wars throughout our history. The 100 Years' War, the 30 Years' War, the 80 Years' War. We've got wars named after how long they lasted, because honestly, we have too many to come up with creative names for all of them." Fox's mental voice creeps into the room, noticeably less confident than usual. "Surely you're exaggerating for dramatic effect. No species wages war continuously against itself." Jake chuckles, a sound that somehow makes the room feel several degrees colder. "You'd think that, wouldn't you? But here's the fun part about humans. We're what you might call persistence hunters. We evolved chasing our prey across vast distances until they literally died of exhaustion. We didn't develop claws or fangs or natural armor. We developed endurance." He clicks to the next slide, showing human anatomy diagrams that suddenly look less like educational material and more like technical specifications for a particularly efficient predator. "We can run for hours without stopping. We can survive in temperature ranges that would kill most species. We sweat, which means we're basically biological cooling systems that can operate in extreme heat. We can go days without food, weeks without proper nutrition, and we'll just keep coming." The room has gotten very quiet indeed. Even Boom has stopped making small explosions, which for a Pyrothean is roughly equivalent to holding your breath. But the really interesting part, Jake continues, now pulling up historical footage that makes everyone wish he hadn't, is how we've spent the last few thousand years turning warfare into an art form. We study it, we teach it in schools, we write books about it. Some of our greatest literature is about war. Some of our most celebrated heroes are people who were really, really good at killing other humans. Professor Krebnox finally finds his voice, though it comes out as more of a strangled gurgle. Mr. Morrison, these statistics seem unusually comprehensive. Where exactly are you getting this data? Jake's smile gets a little wider. Oh, I've always been interested in military history, Professor. Did a bit of reading on the subject back home. That's when he drops the first real bombshell. I'm actually retired military myself, 22 years in the United States Marine Corps. Did 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq, and 1 in Syria. I was a force reconnaissance Marine, which basically means I was really good at finding people who didn't want to be found and then having philosophical discussions with them about their life choices. The silence in the room is now so complete that you could probably hear a pin drop in the next galaxy over. 23 alien students and 1 professor are staring at Jake with the kind of expression usually reserved for discovering that your harmless pet hamster is actually a miniature dragon. The funny thing about being retired military is that you start to notice things, Jake continues conversationally. Like how every species in this room has been talking about conquest and domination and threat assessment, but nobody's actually talked about war. Real war, the kind where you're not trying to impress anyone or prove how tough you are, the kind where you're just trying to make sure the other guy stops breathing before you do. He looks around the room with those same mild eyes that have been watching quietly all semester, except now everyone is finally paying attention to what they're seeing there. Zeph, your Zentarian Empire has conquered 47 systems in 200 years. That's impressive. Humans conquered an entire planet in about 6,000 years. And we did it while fighting each other the whole time. We've never stopped fighting. We just occasionally pause to fight someone else instead. Zeph's massive frame seemed to shrink slightly in his seat. But your technology is primitive. Your weapons are basic chemical propulsion. Yeah, about that, Jake says, pulling up his next slide. We've only had nuclear weapons for about 80 years, but we've built enough of them to destroy our own planet several times over. We're the only species anyone's met who figured out how to split the atom and immediately thought, hey, let's make a bomb out of this. We've got about 13,000 nuclear warheads currently deployed, and that's actually way less than we used to have. The number hangs in the air like a toxic cloud. 13,000 planet killers, created by a species that everyone thought was barely out of the Stone Age. We tested over 2,000 of them, Jake adds helpfully, just to make sure they worked properly. We irradiated entire islands and rendered sections of our own planet uninhabitable. For science. Lim's crystal formations are now cycling through colors that don't appear on any known spectrum, which in crystalline terms is roughly equivalent to a panic attack. That's completely irrational. No logical species would deliberately contaminate their own habitat. Logic's got nothing to do with it, Jake replies cheerfully. We also created chemical weapons that can kill everything in a 20-mile radius, biological weapons that can wipe out entire populations, and we've been very creative with things like napalm, white phosphorus, and cluster munitions. We've got weapons designed specifically to cause maximum suffering rather than quick death, because psychological warfare is just as important as the physical kind. He pauses, looking around the room at faces that are rapidly shifting from condescending amusement to something approaching horror. Oh, and we've never actually stopped making weapons. Even during peacetime, we're constantly developing new and more efficient ways to kill each other. It's like a hobby for us. A really expensive, really sophisticated hobby. Professor Krebnox have gone completely rigid. Mr. Morrison, these claims seem rather extreme. Surely you're engaging in hyperbole for rhetorical effect. Jake just shrugs. Professor, I spent 2 decades of my life learning how to be really good at violence. It was my job. I got paid to study the most effective ways to break things and hurt people. The Marine Corps sent me to schools specifically designed to make me better at warfare. I've got certifications in demolitions, advanced marksmanship, urban combat, psychological operations, and about a dozen other specialties that most species would consider war crime. The room has now achieved a level of silence previously thought to be physically impossible. Even the air recycling system seems to have stopped making noise. And here's the really fun part, Jake says, his grin now definitely not reaching his eyes. I'm not even particularly special by human standards. We've got millions of people like me. We call them veterans, and we've got them from every major conflict we've ever fought. They're your teachers, your mechanics, your store clerks, your accountants, just regular people who happen to know how to field strip an assault rifle blindfolded and can calculate artillery trajectories in their heads. He looked directly at each of his classmates in turn, and for the first time all semester, they're really seeing him. Not the quiet human in the back row, but something much more dangerous, wearing a baseball cap and a friendly smile. So when you ask me what species poses the greatest threat to galactic stability, Jake concludes, I've got to go with the one that spent its entire evolutionary history perfecting the art of warfare and still considers it a recreational activity. The holographic display behind him shifts one final time, showing a simple statistic that makes everyone's blood run cold. Human military spending per year, $2.1 trillion. Human population, 8.2 billion. Number of humans with military training, 65 million. Number of active conflicts involving humans, 47. Average duration of human conflicts, 19.7 years. Jake adjusts his baseball hat and looks around the room with that same pleasant, mild expression he's worn all semester. Any questions? The silence stretches for about 10 seconds before Vok's mental voice creeps back into the room, noticeably shakier than before. Surely this is just historical data. Modern humans have evolved beyond such primitive behaviors. Jake's laugh is genuinely delighted. Huh, that's adorable. No, we really haven't. He clicks to his next slide. We're currently involved in 47 active military conflicts. That's not including the 3 major proxy wars, 17 peacekeeping operations, or what we politely call police actions, in about 30 other countries. Glim flickers through panic colors. But your planet appears so peaceful from space. Yeah, Earth's what we call a Class 12 death world, Jake says cheerfully. Most of you couldn't survive there without environmental suits. We've got weather patterns that regularly kill thousands of people, natural disasters that level entire cities, and wildlife that considers us a light snack. Australia alone has about 20 different animals that can kill you just by existing near them. He pulls up images of hurricanes, volcanic eruptions, and tornadoes. We live on a planet that's actively trying to kill us, so we got really good at not dying. Turns out that skill set translates well to other activities. Boone finally speaks up, his rocky voice smaller than usual. But humans seem so friendly. You bring cookies to class. Right, about those cookies, Jake grins. Chocolate and peanut butter, both of which are toxic to about 60% of known alien species. We eat poison for fun. We also drink ethanol, which is literally a solvent, and we consider it a social activity. For entertainment, we watch horror movies, jump out of perfectly good aircraft, and pay money to be scared by professional fear inducers. Professor Krebnock's tentacles are now twitching spasmodically. This cannot be accurate data. Professor, we have a sport called boxing, where 2 people try to give each other brain damage for money. We have something called mixed martial arts, where the goal is to choke your opponent unconscious or break their joints. We televise these events and eat snacks while watching them. Jake's presentation is now showing footage of various human entertainment that makes the entire class deeply uncomfortable. We also have competitive eating, where people see how much food they can consume before their stomachs rupture. We have extreme sports, where the entire point is to nearly die in creative ways. We invented something called parkour, which is basically what if we made running away from predators into an art form. Zeph's voice is barely a whisper. Your military training? 22 years of studying applied violence, Jake nods. But here's the thing, Zeph. Every human culture independently developed martial arts. We turned fighting into philosophy. We have probably 300 different ways to kill someone with our bare hands, and we teach them to children as character-building exercises. The display shows various human martial arts, each more terrifying than the last. Krav Maga is specifically designed to be as brutal as possible. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu teaches you to strangle people efficiently. Muay Thai is called the art of 8 limbs because we weaponized every part of our bodies. But surely, Glim stammers, your leaders have wisdom, restraint. Jake's grin gets wider. Our greatest military leaders are folk heroes. We name schools after them. Alexander conquered most of the known world by age 30. Napoleon took over Europe just because he felt like it. We study their tactics in our war colleges and consider them inspirational reading. He clicks through images of human military academies. West Point, Sandhurst, St. Cyr. We have universities specifically for teaching warfare. We've been refining military doctrine for thousands of years. We have entire think tanks dedicated to developing new ways to break things and hurt people. And the really fun part, Jake continues, his voice taking on the tone of someone sharing an exciting hobby, is that we never throw anything away. We still use strategies developed by Sun Tzu 2,500 years ago. We still study Roman military engineering. We've got an unbroken chain of military knowledge going back to when we were hitting each other with sharpened sticks. Box's mental voice is now barely a whisper. The scope of your conflicts. World War II involved over 100 million military personnel, Jake says matter-of-factly. We mobilized entire civilizations. We converted our manufacturing base to war production. We rationed food, materials, everything. We made civilian populations part of the war effort. Total war, we call it. The final slide appears, a simple equation that makes everyone's blood freeze. Human beings killed by other human beings in recorded history, approximately 1.2 billion. Human beings killed by all other causes combined, approximately 890 million. We're statistically more dangerous to ourselves than literally everything else in our environment combined, Jake says with obvious pride, including the death world we evolved on. He looks around the room, at 23 faces that have gone through shock and arrived at something approaching existential terror. Questions? Comments? Anyone want to revise their vote? The classroom remains dead silent for exactly 47 seconds, which Professor Krebnox times because his species has an obsessive need to quantify everything, especially trauma. I believe the professor finally manages, his tentacles now curled into what can only be described as defensive positions. It is time for our final vote. Nobody argues. In fact, several students are actively avoiding eye contact with Jake, who continues to stand at the front of the room with that same pleasant, helpful expression he's worn all semester. The holographic ballot appears, and for the first time in academic history, a vote is completed in under 30 seconds. The results display instantly. Humans, 23 votes. Everyone else, 0 votes. Well, Professor Krebnox says weakly, that's decisive. Jake nods appreciatively. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate the support. This was fun. He reaches into his backpack and pulls out a large container. Oh, I brought cookies to celebrate. Homemade chocolate chip with peanut butter frosting. The entire class collectively recoils as if he's just pulled out a live grenade. They're really good, Jake continues cheerfully, apparently oblivious to the fact that 23 beings are now staring at the cookies like they're plutonium. My grandmother's recipe. She used to make them for me when I got back from deployment. Boom, who has spent the entire semester enthusiastically accepting Jake's snacks, now eyes the innocent-looking cookies with deep suspicion. Are they safe? Oh, sure, Jake says, taking a big bite of one. For humans. I mean, the chocolate alone would probably put most of you in the hospital, and the peanut butter could trigger anaphylactic shock in about 12 different species, but they taste great. He looks around the room with genuine confusion at their horrified expressions. What, I thought everyone knew chocolate was toxic to aliens? It's basic xenobiology. Box's mental voice creeps into the room one last time, now completely devoid of its earlier arrogance. You've been bringing us poisonous food all semester? Not on purpose, Jake protests. I mean, I always eat some first to show they're fine. For humans, he pauses thoughtfully. Although I guess that's kind of the point, isn't it? Toxicity tolerance is just another fun human trait. Professor Krebnox makes a sound like a deflating balloon. Class dismissed. As 23 aliens file out of the room with the urgency of people fleeing a natural disaster, Jake packs up his presentation materials and finishes his cookie. He's already looking forward to next semester's course, Interspecies Diplomatic Relations. After all, someone should probably teach these kids about human concepts like mutually assured destruction, psychological warfare, and why humans consider speak softly and carry a big stick to be a reasonable foreign policy doctrine. It's going to be educational.